In some of the Eastern schools of spirituality, we run across the concept of chakras. What these are is an interpretation of that inside-out view, where it's possible to look at the human mind as having structure. And you could think of this as layers, as levels. You could equally look at them as being centers. And there's energy flowing between all these different centers, between all these different levels at all times. Now, in the commonly accepted view, there are 7 chakras. But when I look at it just from this layman's perspective, and I want to zoom back on it to the maximum degree of generality without losing the basic meaning, what I see are 4 different levels. We could zoom into one of them and break them down into more detail. We're not going to do that today, but we're going to go for a tour of those 4 most basic levels, those 4 most basic centers that make up an energy structure of the living human mind. The base layer I like to refer to as the physical. We feel physical pain, physical pleasure, physical discomfort, physical comfort. It's a dimension of its own. And yet, you can also see that it's related, because if we have positive or negative physical inputs, we relate that to what's going on around us. And we start engaging our broader thinking capacity into making sense out of it. Now, the second level to this view, the second center, is our emotional center. And again, emotionally, we can feel pleasure, we can feel pain, we can feel comfort, we can feel discomfort. It's its own dimension, distinct and separate from the physical, although it's often related. The third level, or third center, is where our thinking minds reside. I like to think of it as the intellectual level, or the intellectual center. Some might call it the ego, but I think that's narrowing it down a little too much. It's where our analytical minds and our verbal processes have a home. This is also where our creative capacities find expression. Although it could certainly be said that it's the inspiration that comes through connecting with those other centers that fuels that creative process. Now, the fourth level I like to call the spiritual level. Although I guess you could also think of it as an overall temperature reading on the entire system. How well are all those different parts working together, not only internally within ourselves, but with the world around us? All the people, places, and things that we interact with, are things in harmony? One of the reasons I like to call this the spiritual level is because the environment we live in is largely a social environment, and if that society is spiritually in tune with beneficial philosophies and living and working around those mutually beneficial actions that come from a beneficial philosophy on life, then you can see that that's going to be an environment where we as individuals are going to find more comfort than discomfort, where we're going to find more pleasure than pain, and where we're going to find clarity instead of confusion. You've been listening to the second episode of our Energy Being series, where we look at the 4 centers of the human mind. And I find this approach really useful when you consider situations where you might be manipulated, especially emotionally manipulated, or physically coerced for that matter, and how that can have an impact on our thinking. And when you can take a step back and you look at the broader picture, it can give you a more balanced view of things. I recently ran across a talk given in the 1980s by a man by the name of Manly P. Hall. And he covers the same subject matter in his hour, 20-minute talk. And I'm going to leave a link to that in the show notes for anyone who's interested. And I'm going back to get our next episode out where we are going to be looking at the actual scientific observations of human and animal behavior that seem to indicate that something more than what's obvious is going on. It could just be evidence of spiritual life, scientifically recorded. So subscribe, like, and share, and I'll see you on the flip side.